The First World War, or the Great War as it was known at the time, shook society and changed the face of the globe. For 4 terrible years, 1914 to 1918, the world's empires fought each other fiercely, pulling in their colonies to assist. New Zealand fought on the side of the Entente powers, also called the Allies. The main Allied powers till 1917 were France, Russia and, the empire to which New Zealand belonged, Britain. On the opposing side were the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Each side sought military superiority, which encouraged rapid development of new technology. This ranged from new weapons, such as tanks and poison gas, through better aircraft and communications, to medical equipment, such as mobile X-ray machines and new bandaging materials. For 4 years, the primary campaign of the war was waged along Europe's Western Front. It became a war of attrition, with each side trying to wear the other down. In 1915, Britain attempted to open a second front at Gallipoli, and this was where the New Zealanders joined the Australians to become the Anzacs. The attempt failed. Meanwhile, the battle along the Western and Eastern fronts continued. The following year, New Zealand troops headed to the Somme to fight in one of the bloodiest clashes in history. Over 1 million men from around the world became casualties during the 5-month-long Battle of the Somme. 2,000 New Zealand men lost their lives there. Losses were also high at Passchendaele in Belgium, where 845 men were killed in just a few hours on the 12th of October 1917, the highest one-day death toll suffered by New Zealand forces overseas. By 1917, it looked like Germany and the Central Powers were gaining the upper hand. Then, in April of that year, the United States entered the war, boosting the morale and strength of the Allies and helping to turn the tables. An armistice on the Western Front finally came into effect on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. The war was over. However, the political, social, technological and economic effects were only beginning to be felt. Military defeat, as well as internal turmoil, saw the collapse of 4 empires: Russia, Austria-Hungary, Germany and the Ottoman Empire. The map of the world was redrawn as these empires were carved up into smaller nations and colonies. Germany, in particular, suffered devastating consequences to its economy, and the economic and social legacy left by the war contributed to the rise of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, and ultimately to the Second World War. The United States, meanwhile, emerged from the First World War as a new global power. Once the war was over, its technological developments were put to use commercially. This boosted some countries' economies and led to greater industrialisation. Much changed on the social front as well. With the men away at war, women in many countries had taken on new roles in paid employment and community organisations. For New Zealand, the 4 years of the First World War had exacted an immense cost. Almost 10% of the country's 1.1 million people had gone overseas to take part, and nearly 1 in 5 had not come back, almost 2% of the total New Zealand population. Nearly 3,000 New Zealand men died at Gallipoli, and more than 4 times as many on the Western Front. On the 28th of June 1919, New Zealand and the other dominions of the British Empire signed the peace agreement, the Treaty of Versailles. They signed in their own right, albeit as part of the British Empire delegation. They also joined the newly established League of Nations as full members, marking an important step in the Dominion's paths to independence.